Online mercantilism is a persistent power relationship established between the Hanseatic League and the new trade kings. Imagine that you control the trade channel. Why would you need to own territory? This question reveals how human thinking, political power, and economic power have repeatedly reformed throughout history. In medieval Europe, cities were protected by walls, but real power was not formed in stone. It took shape in warehouses, ports, and at contract tables. Ships sailing the cold waters of the Baltic Sea carried not only grain, linen, and amber. They carried an invisible political architecture. The Hanseatic League did not conquer cities. It governed them by binding them to one another. This binding was not simple commercial cooperation. It was the centralized coordination of prices, routes, and access permissions. City councils appeared formally independent, yet the arteries of trade beat to the rhythm of a cartel. The right of access to trade had become a tool more influential than political authority itself. For the Hanseatic merchant, who owned the land mattered little. What mattered was who controlled the goods passing through that land. This logic operated quietly outside the noise of feudal wars. Borders redrawn by swords often could not affect prices that warehouses did not change. The power of this system lay in its invisibility. No emperor was the leader of the merchant cartel. No king was officially subordinate to the League. Yet when a port was closed, credit cut, or insurance withdrawn, even the strongest thrones were shaken. Power was exercised not through open violence, but through the interruption of flow. The classical depiction of mercantilism emphasizes state intervention to protect trade balances, but the Hanseatic model was subtler. Here, the state did not manage trade. Trade indirectly shaped states. Cities were forced to make political decisions in the shadow of economic dependencies. Over time, this structure came to be accepted as natural and inevitable. Trade routes were imagined as immutable borders, though they were not the product of human choice but of geography. Yet every voyage and every port selection was the result of concrete interests. What was invisible was not nature, but the forces making decisions. In today's world, servers have replaced walls and platforms have replaced ports. The global supply chain is built not only on physical space, but also on digital infrastructure. A platform's algorithm can be as selective and decisive as a medieval customs gate. Access permission is once again the primary currency of power. Digital platforms do not occupy territory, but they condition market access. Who is seen, who is found, who sells, and who is forgotten are questions answered at the level of code. This mechanism recalls the key to a Hanseatic warehouse, only this time the key is not physical, but a legal and technological protocol. New trade cartels speak the language of competition, yet their behavior is based on coordination. The synchronized movement of prices, delivery times, and visibility shows that the market is not spontaneous, but a managed system. This management appears decentralized, but its effect is highly centralized. In the Middle Ages, merchant guilds imposed strict rules when admitting new members. These rules were justified in the name of quality, but their main purpose was to restrict competition. Modern platforms use similar language, creating entry barriers under the banner of security and efficiency. History has only changed its terminology. The decline in the need to control territory does not mean the disappearance of power, but a change in how it is formed. Physical occupation is costly and risky, but controlling flow is quiet and enduring. For this reason, digital mercantilism is less visible, yet leaves a deeper impact. In this model, states sometimes act as regulators and sometimes as partners. The pragmatic relationships Hanseatic cities built with kings are visible today between platforms and governments. Issues of taxation, data, and security are negotiated in exchange for trade privileges. Power is once again built on mutual dependence. History has shown us that such structures appear long-lasting because they are added to daily life as an inseparable part of it. As people accept trade routes, platforms, and price fluctuations as natural, imagining alternatives becomes difficult. Even the collapse of the Hanseatic League was not sudden, but slow and almost silent. This silence is dangerous because it conceals where change will come from. The weakening of the League occurred with the emergence of new technologies, alternative routes, and new political centers. Today's digital cartels face similar pressures, but their response is more flexible and faster. The issue is not only economic efficiency, but who uses power and how. The structure that controls trade determines which parts of society will grow and which will be compressed. Although these decisions are presented as technical, their social consequences are deep and long-term. Hanseatic merchants saw themselves merely as intermediaries, but history remembers them as political actors. Modern platforms likewise present their role as neutral infrastructure. Yet the claim of neutrality is one of the most effective masks of power. History has recognized this mask many times. At this point, the essence of digital mercantilism becomes clear. Power arises not from direct domination, but from creating dependency. Controlling territory may be temporary, but controlling flow shapes long-term behavior. As this behavior forms, the system turns into a self-protecting organism. To understand what these structures are like, it is enough to see the path from medieval ports to today's data centers. History does not repeat here, but it reconstructs the same logic of power in a different form. Online mercantilism is the current name of this continuity, and its full impact is not yet visible. In this course of events, it becomes clear that not only structures, but also the human factor and mindset have not yet changed. For the medieval merchant, security meant ensuring that the delivery of goods was not interrupted. For the modern platform, it is the continuity of data and visibility. In both cases, risk management stands at the center of power, and ethical questions are lost behind the curtain of efficiency. In Hanseatic cities, the concept of legal equality existed on paper, but trade privileges effectively abolished this equality in practice. A similar paradox exists in the modern digital environment. Rules are presented as the same for everyone, but their effects create sharp differences between those with access to resources and those without. Over time, these differences become structured and turn into system behavior independent of individual choices. Merchant cartels operated regardless of individual intentions, and platform algorithms likewise follow optimization goals rather than personal morality. Responsibility thus shifts from concrete actors to abstract mechanisms. This diffusion of responsibility is a familiar trick of history. When no one is the author of a decision, everyone claims the outcome was inevitable. The cities of the Hanseatic League justified their policies with this argument. Modern digital cartels repeat the same logic under the name of technical necessity. At this point, the language of power changes, but its substance remains constant. The sword is replaced by the contract, and the contract by terms of use. As people accept these terms without reading them, there is no functional difference between a medieval merchant seal and a modern click. Authority is consolidated through silent consent. The historical perspective shows that such systems become visible only when their internal contradictions deepen. As conflicts of interest between cities within the Hanseatic League intensified, unity weakened. Similar tensions appear in digital cartels through platform-to-platform competition and state interventions. These tensions are sometimes presented as innovation, but in reality they expose the cracks in the structure. New technology promises freedom, yet often becomes a more refined tool of control in the hands of existing power centers. In history, technological leaps have rarely brought justice by themselves. They have merely increased the speed of the game. As speed increases, distance also grows. This distance between decision makers and those affected weakens moral responsibility. Just as the Hanseatic merchant never saw the Banda Islands, the modern platform executive does not know the lives affected by an algorithm. This lack of recognition ensures the system's continuity. As this continuity is accepted without question, it becomes the norm. People begin to see this organization of trade as natural. Alternatives are portrayed as either imaginary or dangerous. Thus, the system protects itself not only economically, but also psychologically, equating change with risk. The lesson of history is clear here. Power rarely endures through open violence. It more often solidifies by seeping into daily habits. Digital mercantilism is the modern form of these habits. To understand it, one need not seek new terms, but carefully examine old mechanisms. From this perspective, history is not merely a memory of the past, but an X-ray of present behavior. The power of the Hanseatic League was not questioned as long as it increased the prosperity of cities, because the system worked. Modern digital cartels derive the same legitimacy from efficiency, fast delivery, low prices, and convenience render power relations invisible. Invisibility here is not accidental, but by design. The more smoothly a system works, the less its underlying structures are discussed. In the Middle Ages, trade routes were not shown on maps, yet everyone knew they existed. Today, algorithms operate without maps, and most people cannot even imagine their direction. This gap in imagination has political consequences. When control mechanisms are not understood, no collective response forms against them. Hanseatic merchants benefited precisely from this gap. Modern platforms likewise use the technical complexity of decisions as a kind of shield. Technical language pushes ethical responsibility into the background. Decisions are presented as if made by systems rather than people. This approach serves the same function in both historical and contemporary power structures. As blame shifts from individuals to mechanisms, the need for change becomes an abstract problem. For historians, this point is critical, because it is precisely here that economic structure turns into political form. The Hanseatic League was not an official state, yet it exerted state-like influence. Digital cartels similarly remain outside legal categories while producing public consequences. This ambiguity expands the field of action for power. In such systems, change usually comes through external shocks. The opening of new routes, technological leaps, or political conflicts disrupt the balance. The weakening of the Hanseatic League was the result of such multi-layered pressures. Modern digital mercantilism is still at the beginning of this phase. This initial phase appears dangerously stable. Stability does not keep people alert, it relaxes them. In history, the most profound changes usually occur after these moments of comfort, because the system loses flexibility under the weight of its own success, and internal contradictions deepen. The future of digital mercantilism is hidden in these contradictions. The tension between centralized access and claims of innovation, the gap between global scale and local impact, and the balance between speed and responsibility remain unresolved. As long as these questions remain unanswered, history recalls its familiar paths. These paths lead us back to the core principle. The structure that controls trade can establish authority without owning territory. This authority is silent, enduring, and often accepted. To understand it, it is enough to look at the cartels of the past, because the platforms of the future are shaped in their shadow. The irony of history is that the newest systems are built upon the oldest reflexes. Digital mercantilism may speak the language of technology, but in essence it continues a familiar story. As long as the relationship between power, flow, and dependency remains unchanged, the names may change, but the outcomes remain the same.